We're now getting closer to Christmas, which means it's peak time for some bargains and also some scams. So why don't we kick off the festive season with a look at my brand new RTX 4090 that I just bought from China for just £29. Right, so this here is meant to be my RTX 4090 that I've ordered from China for about £25–30. Clearly exactly what one of these is meant to cost you, and just in time for the Christmas season. So it doesn't say it cost me that much, it says here it was $20, the weight's wrong, this has all been filled out incorrectly, and it's no surprise, it's been opened by customs. I don't know if you can see that, it's got the slice marks down there, another one down there where they've opened it up to make sure it's nothing suspicious. Sometimes they do it randomly, sometimes they do it if the paperwork doesn't line up, and sometimes it's if they x-ray it and it doesn't show up as what it is. So already off to a great start. That didn't stop them from, seizing this item, they've still sent it to me. So we have the £25 RTX 4090. And what's in the box? Got it the wrong way around. How's this open? Slides out. This immediately looks bad. What do we got? Thank you for your order. Hello valued customer, thank you for your order of Nvidia RTX 4090 graphics card. We hope you will enjoy this product. If there are any issues, please reach out to us at shop1104014048 at valuebuy.xyz. Don't need Amazon or eBuyer. Yeah, you want to use valuebuy.xyz. As your purchase is under category of computer graphics card, please use manufacturer driver website to ensure proper function. Use of incorrect software is not covered by seller. We at ValueBuy do not condone or endorse use of illegitimate software, reserving right to remove sale from warranty period if inaccurate software is contained. Thank you, customer. Well, that is sketchy. And what else have we got? We've got RTX 4090 paperwork. I can't read any of that, but that is an RTX 4090 graphics card. More how to install our RTX 4090. And the last one looks like it's got a picture. Physics effects on a massive scale. Tens thousands of objects, rigid body physics. That looks like a physics slide. Interesting. And here we have the main part. It doesn't look like your average scam though, and this packaging is awful. That's just bits of foam they've plastered across the box. That might have been customs, to be fair, I don't know. This probably has been opened. Has it been opened? Yeah, this has been opened, the seal's been broken. So unless it came like this, customs has investigated this card. And what have we actually got? It does look RTX 4090 like. It's got some foam in there. It's Nvidia. I don't know if you can make out that logo there. If I can try and angle that. That is a very old Nvidia logo. What card even is this? We're going to have to plug it in and find out. But the £25 RTX 4090 is certainly a graphics card. Whether or not it's any good, we will wait and see. But I don't think that's a 4090. Let's go test it. See, this is an upgrade actually. We're going from a 4060 to a 4090. And this graphics card's bigger, so you know that this is real. I will actually be amazed if this turns on. I've got very, very low expectations. But there's always a chance they've sent us a working graphics card. And I love seeing how the scams progress. We've gone to we were on the 600 series last time, and this one looks newer. That unclips there. The moment we've all been waiting for. RTX 4090 is in the computer. It does take two 6-pins. This must be a really power efficient model. It feels quite flimsy. All the money's gone into the power saving rather than the build quality. Now, let's turn it on. Right, power's on now. Are we going to get a post signal? Is the monitor on? It's turned off the system. System's back on. Is the fan spinning? Come on, give us a display. We have a display. We have ASUS. So we've got this, which is the instruction sheet from the seller. And we need to go to the manufacturer website and find some Nvidia drivers. So why don't we go find some Nvidia drivers and see what they can do. RTX 4090 drivers. Right, we'll run these and we will see what it does. That's down to 700 megabytes. So before I could even install the drivers at the moment, Windows has managed to install them for me, and it's currently downloaded the latest version of the drivers. I don't know if it lists which version. Yep, 2024 10th 15th, Windows 10 64-bit, the latest drivers for the RTX 4090. There's a few odd things going on here. I mean, the release date of 2012, this is probably just an engineering sample. Everything checks out, I'm sure. It's just a really early prototype for the 4090 that came out 12 years ago. But some of the specs look okay. 0 megabytes of memory. It says it's from Nvidia. That's about all we've got. So why don't we try and load something up, find out what this actually is, and see what's going on, because I need to know. Just as a side note, it has crashed the PC, so I'm going to try and restart things and see if it'll make it do anything. So we're already off to a great start. The 4090 crashed the PC. Maybe it just needs a restart. Fortunately, after another restart, the system seemed to stabilise and didn't want to crash anymore. Not really all too much of a surprise given that we had just thrown in a graphics card that can only be described as the most ambitious scam to date, with them now repurposing old, high-tier Nvidia cards and attempting to flash them and make them show up as the latest flagship. And for all intents and purposes, they've done it, as it does show up as the Nvidia GeForce RTX 4090. I mean, it even loads into games and benchmarks as a 4090. I wasn't expecting TimeSpy to even start, but it did, the test ran, and it even uploads as an RTX 4090. Probably the lowest score of all time that any 4090 has ever managed to achieve, and there were some certain caveats with the submission, but what are the specs of our fake RTX 4090? And for this low of a price, how much power are they actually giving you? So after a little bit of digging around and looking over what's going on here, what are the specs of this here RTX 4090 scam? Well, it seems to be Nvidia's second-tier flagship from 2012, being the GTX 670, only they have made some slight modifications to try and soup things up slightly, and it's certainly no RTX 4090. But for the money paid, it's not actually that bad. It's based on the GK104 variant of Kepler, which was Nvidia's architecture a while ago, as opposed to the latest Ada-based GPUs. It does pack a bit of a punch still, with 1,344 CUDA cores, 112 TMUs, 32 ROPs, and 2GB of GDDR5-based VRAM, which shows up as 0 megabytes on the computer. So, no clue what's going on there. It does support Vulkan, DirectX 12, NVENC, and enough features that they should, I mean, if they do work, they've actually got enough on here that some people may very well be fooled into thinking they've somehow got an RTX 4090 for next to nothing. They have also souped up the card a bit with higher clocks and a higher power allowance to match these. So in theory, this should actually run better than a normal GTX 670. It cost me £27 today as a scam, and generally on the market today these can go anywhere from £10 to £30 depending on where you buy them from. So they're not even terrible value, and this is a price that you could get anywhere in the world if you bought one of these scams. So it's a conflicting one, because it's not a 4090, and there is some power there, it's just not modern flagship power. By this point though, we've done enough faffing about and we've managed to get everything set up. We even had the card running what it said were the latest drivers, and it hadn't crashed in a little while or locked up the system, even managing to complete 3D Mark earlier, so we know it can do 3D graphics, and DirectX 12 at that. But the question is, if you did go and get yourself scammed on the RTX 4090 and ended up with one of these, just how bad are things going to be? And is the performance so dire that you'll be feeling regret the moment you start the benchmarks? Starting off the benchmarks, we have Red Dead Redemption 2, because why don't we start things right in at the deep end? For once though, it actually let us change the graphics options. Usually an issue with this game is when you've got 2GB of VRAM or under, the game just won't let you change anything. and you can't go over the limit, it doesn't let you do things like that. So usually I have to go into the INI file and do it all manually. But things started off strong here. We were able to change the settings, and it was running well, until the card crashed out midway through the built-in benchmark. It took a couple of complete restarts of the system, and then 3 more attempts to get back into the game, but eventually once we'd done it, things ran absolutely fine. We had to use lower settings in 720p, which doesn't exactly scream 4090 material, but for the price we paid, the game was running really well, anywhere between 40 to 60 FPS during most instances. You can't rely on DLSS or anything like that, because the card simply crashes out when you enable it, as it's not an RTX 4090, it just doesn't work. But Red Dead Redemption 2 actually now runs on scam graphics cards, which is insanity. Baldur's Gate 3 did actually run, which was a surprise, especially given that this is not the real card. That's not to say there weren't problems again, as after a bit of gameplay, the card locked up the entire system, which is a thing it tends to do with modern games. But it didn't lock it up in the way you might think. For some reason, it froze the game, but was also attempting to load the start menu at the same time, which caused this really weird crash. But after another restart, things stabilised, and the game ran really quite well with a mixture of low and medium settings in 720p. In simpler areas, the game could see upwards of 60 FPS even, but mostly in gameplay it hovered anywhere between 40 to 50. Not too bad for what is a new and intensive game. Vulkan mode would for some reason crash the card instantly, probably because the drivers for this are somehow working, but I don't understand why, so DirectX 11 was the only option here. It's not ultra settings at 4K like it should be, but it does run, and these are the settings that the actual game will default to, meaning you wouldn't know. So I'm guessing it's changing the settings based on VRAM here? GTA 5 actually ran better than I've ever seen it run on most Kepler cards. I don't know what tricks the scammers have pulled here, but things were running so well that I had to run the game with a nice mixture of high and ultra settings just to put some load on things. No, we can't manage 4K, but what we can do is run things fantastically in 1080p, with no compromise on frame rate or fidelity. This is not something I have ever expected to say about a scam card, but we're now approaching the territory that scam cards can run some of the most popular games out there today with no issues. You can even crank the settings up. So with the default settings this loads to, it runs at well over 100 frames a second. You have to manually turn things up to ultra to actually lower that frame rate down. I mean, this is better than how my PC ran the game when GTA 5 came out. And it's on something that's being used to deceive you, which is insanity. It's not even like GTA Online became a struggle, as the frame rate did drop, but this was down to utilization, which did take a bit of a beating, probably given this card is using some weird amalgamation of drivers and firmware to even launch the game. Generally though, even in a packed out lobby with 30 players, the game still hovered around 50 FPS, which felt perfectly smooth to me, and even when people were launching rockets and causing general chaos, you know, it wasn't exactly as great as the Kepler flagships, or the latest and greatest 4090 itself can do, but it's also not bad for something that is once again being used to trick you. It's also worth noting that GTA 5 didn't crash at all, and had no issues running, which was a nice change after the last 2 benchmarks, and their slight issues that took me a while to actually benchmark them. Counter-Strike 2 though wasn't without a weird issue of its own. The game would not actually allow you to run it in 1080p. The maximum was 1600 by 900, and there is nothing you can do to fix this. Even manually setting the launch options doesn't do anything. People are probably going to say there's a fix, but in reality, let's be honest, this is a £20 RTX 4090 knockoff, it's going to have issues. However, there weren't any issues with performance. With medium settings in 900p, we saw on average a very competitive 112 FPS, which would only go down to 70 FPS during really intensive parts of the benchmark as smokes and flames filled up the VRAM, as some games really can't detect how much it has. In actual competitive games and casual game modes, this was less of an issue, and the frame rate could often be higher, which is ridiculous that you can have a competitive experience on a scam card. It's ridiculous so far. next up with BeamNG, and with a mixture of medium and high settings using full HD, we were able to go straight into one of the most intensive maps without any slowdown. Now, you're never going to see 60 FPS on one of these maps, especially with these settings, as they can hammer even real graphics cards. So considering this weird contraption we've got today, it seems miraculous that it's launching, it's stable, and it is actually playable. Load times did seem a tad longer than usual, which might be down to some weird driver trickery going on, but that's the only thing I found to complain about here. Load times. The actual performance, not 4090 level, but pretty playable for those that aren't actually going to be monitoring their frame rates. Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord also ran fantastically with just the high presets. The frame rate wasn't as consistent as it could be, and once again is nowhere near as high as it should be for a real graphics card, but for what is a new game running in 1080p with high settings on a card that cost us hardly anything, at this point I know it's a scam, but it's admirable how well this thing is doing compared to the previous generations of scam cards we've seen. The fact that it's actually posing good value by itself is another matter entirely. Even brand new indie games still in development ran well beyond they had any right to, and due to the driver-side trickery, we actually saw near GTX 780 performance, a card we looked at a couple of weeks ago, from what is a modified 670. So it does sort of show that Kepler can run things fine with a bit of driver-side assistance, or whatever weird thing is going on here. Sure, it's not great performance, but this actually ran quite nicely. Higher settings could absolutely decimate it though, which is to be expected on a card that only has 2 gigs of VRAM. And this was my personal favourite benchmark. Fallout 4, renowned for running downright awfully on virtually everything, was running here with mostly high settings in 1080p. And no word of a lie, for a game that constantly bogs down to the mid-30s and 40s on even the best of cards today. Of course, this is the one instance where it just happens to run perfectly fine. During the entire benchmark, there were only 1 or 2 frame drops. Even when in towns engaging in combat, the frame rate was dead solid. This has only ever happened once for us on budget builds, and that was with playing the game in 480i. So the scam graphics card may be the first thing we've ever tested that can run Fallout 4 at high settings at a consistent 60 FPS. This is unheard of for real graphics cards, and I don't know how the real RTX4090 fares here, but for once, they've got stiff competition from a scam graphics card. Of course, Fallout is a weird benchmark, you never know how it's going to run. So, to have it run this well on a scam is just a very Fallout thing to do. In terms of emulation as well, virtually anything on the Wii or GameCube, PS2, anything of that generation will run in 4K and can then be downsampled to however you need it. It's not the most stressful benchmark in the world, but the idea that anything is running so well in 4K on something you don't want to actually be sent is ludicrous. And to really feed into the theme of how ludicrous this is, just take a quick look and ask yourself, can a scam run Crysis? Because we're now at the point where the cards being used to scam you and take your money are so powerful they can run Crysis at ultra settings at over 60 FPS. I wasn't expecting this. It was always a dream of mine to max out Crysis, and to see it run so smoothly, it's just fantastic. And the fact that cards now considered to be so worthless, the only way to get rid of them is to move them on as a scam, it shows how far we've come and how little we've moved at the same time. What a weird set of benchmarks, and the perfect way to bring them round to a nice endpoint. You aren't getting a 4090, and you are getting ripped off, but you're still able to max out one really intensive game with gorgeous looking graphics settings. Just try and wrap your head around that. To summarise the benchmarks, well, it's always a bit hard with scam cards because there's 2 ways to look at it. On the one hand, and probably the main way to look at it, it is not an RTX 4090 at all. The performance here is nowhere near Nvidia's latest flagship, even with the tweaks they've tried to make it seem better. Anything like DLSS may look like you can enable it in-game, but will crash the system, and anything with RTX will also do the same. Of course, the PC will lock up if you do anything with ray tracing because there isn't any ray tracing components on the card. However, on the other hand, this is a really competent card
that scammers have somehow managed to make more feasible in 2024, 12 years after the GTX 670 actually came out. I mean, when did we ever expect scam cards to be running new AAA titles with actually okay settings and frame rates? Sure, in the latest games they're 720p, and the reason they've done it is so you believe they haven't scammed you and won't go trying to go on eBay or AliExpress for a refund. But in reality, for the low price they're actually selling it, I mean it is still more than market value here in the UK, mind, they're not actually that bad for how well they perform. I mean, maxing out GTA 5 used to be something you'd want a card to do, and now even the cards deemed so unsellable that they're scamming you to get rid of them can do it. It's a really wild world. While scam graphics cards have progressed in these recent years, we've stagnated so much that they're actually on their way to catching up with the real world of graphics cards. It's weird, this happens year on year, and they're getting better, yet the price of them hasn't changed. And what's more is that the feature set isn't actually too broken on these cards. Things like NVENC support, which usually when we get scam cards don't work or we'll find them crashing the PC, they don't work. But here, the only thing that doesn't work is the AV1 modes because it doesn't have it. But the basic NVENC encoder does work, albeit with some caveats. It could do some strange cropping in places. But for someone that doesn't know they've been scammed, or someone that just needs a card that is still surprisingly functional, these quality of life features are now not only present, but somewhat functional on a product that solely exists to steal your money. I used to dream of having a card that could do decent NVENC, and now you've got one that can do hardware encoding, and they're doing it to rip you off. One area they have actually beaten the 4090 in is power consumption, hovering anywhere between 170 to 190 watts due to the increased power limits they've imposed in the firmware. The card actually isn't using too much power compared to the real-life flagship, and even with what appears to be an Nvidia reference cooler slapped on there, they must have done some maintenance to these things, as gaming tends to run around the mid-70 degrees, and even in a full-on stress test, this thing maxes out at 81 degrees without the cooler ramping up. This thing is pretty much silent in operation, and with the reference design, chucks the heat out of your case. So that was quite pleasant. So that there brings us to the end of the latest scam GPU on the market, and in many ways they're kind of continuing the prospect of being really good value. I've only seen a few of these on eBay and they're mostly on AliExpress at the moment. Really, I would say don't bother and get a real card for less, but for some people this might actually be not a bad option. I mean, it's good, and if they sold this card worldwide on AliExpress for the same price I paid, which was around £25, then it's not a bad price for a card that anyone globally can buy. Then again, if they were trustworthy and sold them like they said they were, a souped up GTX 670, I'm sure they would sell. And frankly, old flagships and their cut down versions are now worthless, and trying to shift them locally, yet alone export them globally, is difficult. So I suppose on the one hand, the only way they can get rid of these without losing out on too much money would be to do some trickery and make this card the 4090. It's not. And I mean, there was definitely some weird things going on here. The drives are very unstable, and 3D Mark does correct your submissions to say GTX 670 after it's uploaded because it does still have the hardware ID of the original graphics card on there. And it's okay. I hope you've all enjoyed this world of scam graphics cards again. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that they are actually approaching decent territory for not a great deal of money. I mean, if you've got your money back on this, then you've ended up with an old flagship for free now, which is amazing. Anyway, be careful when you're buying things this Christmas season. It goes without saying we're going to have lots of scams featured this month if you want to see them. I hope you've all enjoyed watching, and good night.